If you've been following me for any time now, you know that I'm going through a lot. My career is coming to an end. After 18 years of police work, I now know the date of the end. And that's at the end of this month, when it's determined at what level of disability I'm going to sit at. But I know that major changes in my life are about to occur. And through the 7 years that I've known the Lord, I've really, really known and followed and sought after and built my faith in the Lord, which stemmed from a very specific time, a date where I met God and God showed me his faithfulness. I've been building my faith. I want you to know, because in this time, as this whole year of kind of waiting and dealing and wrestling with God has occurred, and now, just recently, some building blocks on top that could take my life and my wife's life in radically different directions. Sometimes I sit here and I wonder if I have enough faith. I'm supposed to be a man of God. I'm supposed to have faith in God. I'm supposed to not worry and be anxious for nothing. Let nothing come between me and him, and just allow him to work in my life. So much so that I haven't even looked for a new job, hoping that God, having faith in God that he would provide one. And strangely enough, he has done just that. But it has some caveats to it that I'm still wondering what's going on. Not necessarily a job I can take now, but God's timing may not allow me to take a job right now based on some of these building blocks that are coming upon my life. But God takes care of all of this stuff. And I'm supposed to have all of this faith. I'm supposed to believe in God and that he will take care of all of these things. And what happens is the devil starts to whisper in my ear, "You're some Christian you are," when I start to worry and start to wonder if I need to take some actions in my own strength. Proverbs chapter 3 tells us, lean not on your own understanding, but in every way, identify God in the midst of it, and he'll direct your path. I can't lean on my own power. I don't know what God wants to do with me. He only gives me the next step. But here lies the problem. It puts me in this place where I wonder if I'm a lackluster Christian because I don't put 100% of myself into believing God and then just letting it all go. I still have my fears and my anxieties and my worries. I still take actions into my own hands sometimes, even when I don't want to, but it doesn't make any sense to me, So as I started back through the book of Genesis, after we finished Genesis 1 through 11, I've been reading. I started the Bible over again. As I continually read through the Bible over and over and over again, I need to hide his word in my heart so that if something happens in this government and Christians become persecuted and the word becomes illegal, I have it in my heart in case I don't have access to the word anymore. And it continually builds my faith in believing in God. But I've been reading through this life of Jacob. Now, to know who Jacob is, Abraham is the one in Genesis 12 who got the promise. Leave your father and his family. I want you to bring your family out, and I'm going to show you where to go. I'm going to make you the father of a great nation. Abraham had his sons. His son's name was Isaac. Isaac was the one that Abraham was going to sacrifice on the altar, but God provided a lamb. Isaac had a son named Jacob. And in the Bible, in the Old Testament, God refers to himself as the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So Jacob is no slouch here in the Bible. He's certainly more important than I am. But I want to take you through a personality conflict that Jacob has in his life. Now, Genesis chapter 25 through Genesis chapter 49 is Jacob's life and the life of his 12 sons who would become the 12 tribes of Israel. So I don't want to take you through his entire life, but I want to show you a pattern of him building his faith, finding his faith, understanding that God is real, but still struggling sometimes to lean on God completely. And then I want to show you an end that maybe you didn't expect. So Isaac has two sons, Jacob and Esau. They're twins, although they look very different. And Esau is the firstborn, Jacob is the secondborn, and Jacob talks Esau into giving him his birthright, which is already conniving in itself. He was known as a swindler. And when Isaac's about to die, he's overheard. Isaac tells Esau, I'm going to die. I want to give you the blessing. So I want you to go out and make some food for me. Well, his mom, who liked Jacob better, Isaac's wife, Esau and Jacob's mom liked Jacob better. And so Rebekah told Jacob, let's lie, so you could swindle the birthright, the blessing out of your father by pretending to be Esau. Now, nothing's really changed the way that he's kind of this swindler, but even at this point, even this plan bothers him. And I only tell you that for this reason. In chapter 27, verse 11, it says, And Jacob said to Rebekah, his mother, Look, Esau, my brother, is a hairy man, and I'm a smooth-skinned man. Perhaps my father will feel me, and I shall seem to be a deceiver to him, and I shall bring a curse on myself and not a blessing. Jacob clearly knows that this plan is wrong, yet Rebekah talks him into it anyway. So while Esau's gone, Jacob pretends to be Esau. And they take the lamb skin and they put it on his arm so it feels hairy. And they go in. Jacob couldn't see very well. He feels his arms. He thinks it's Esau, but his voice sounds like Jacob. It's all just messed up, and who knows what Isaac's thinking. But I point this out because in verse 20 it says, But Isaac said to his son, How is it that you have found it so quickly, my son? That is because he told Esau to go out and find wild game to make his favorite dish. Rebekah takes 2 lambs out of the farm and kills and makes a dish, and he's like, wow, you weren't even gone very long, and all of a sudden you have all this food. Well, Jacob has to answer, and he says, and Jacob said, because the Lord your God brought it to me. A lie. Now, why I point this out is because Isaac was a man of God, and no doubt he told his son Jacob about God. But Jacob never acted as though he knew God. He always was looking for the right way to make himself, put himself in a better place. And when he lies to his father and he calls God your God, not my God, not our God, not the God, but your God, which makes me believe that at this point Jacob didn't believe in God. Now I'm going to say that when I was young, I'm not sure if I believed in God or not. We went to church, we talked about it, I prayed repetitive prayers, but I never listened, I never read the Bible, I never really cared, it never gave me any understanding or belief in Him. So if somebody were to come and say God is in control, I may have said, yeah, God, your God is in control, my God, I don't know. At that time I believed that the world was billions of years old and every God led to heaven, and it was all religion was just to make you feel better and all these other things. I never even believed in this word until a circumstance came to me that made me see God. Well, that happens to Jacob. Jacob says, this is your God. It's not my God. I don't believe in God. But he gets in trouble with Esau, and Esau wants to kill him. And so Rebekah tells Jacob, he better get going because Esau's really angry. I'll send for you when he's calmed himself down a little bit. And so it's set up that Jacob runs to Rebekah's brother in another land, in another nation. His name is Laban. He goes to Laban and he's told by Jacob, you need to marry one of Laban's ancestors there, one of his daughters. So he gets there. So Jacob is on his way. He's by himself. He's wandering in the desert, heading out to Laban, heading out to see Laban, maybe get married, stay away from Esau, wondering if Esau's going to jump out from any rock somewhere and kill him or whatever, because he's swindled his brother one too many times and now he's a wanted man. And we find ourselves in chapter 28, verse 10. Now Jacob went out from Beersheba and he went toward Haran. And so he came to a certain place and stayed there all night because the sun had set. And he took one of the stones of that place and put it under his head, and as he lay down in the place to sleep. And then he dreamed, and behold, a ladder was set up on the earth, and its top reached to heaven. And there the angels of the God were ascending and descending on it. And behold, the Lord stood above it and said, I am the Lord God of Abraham your father, and God of Isaac. The land on which you lie I will give to you and your descendants. Also your descendants shall be as the dust of the earth. You shall spread abroad the west and the east to the north and south, and in you and in your seed all the families of the earth shall be blessed. Behold, I am with you, and will keep you wherever you go, and will bring you back to the land, for I will not leave you until I have done what I have spoken to you. So Jacob, in the middle of the wilderness, lies down to go to sleep at the night, and he has this dream, and God gives him he continues the Abrahamic covenant. Now he tells Abraham, I'm going to make you a great nation, and all the worlds and all the nations of the world will be blessed by your seed. That's Jesus in the future, thousands of years from now. But he gives the same promise to Isaac, and he gives the same promise to Jacob, that you, in your descendants, in your kids, you will be blessed. You will be a great nation. The population will be so big you can't count it. This is a promise of God coming from a dream. And so here he is. He says, I'll be with you, I'll take care of you, and I'll bring you back to this land later. Now, this is a crazy promise to a man who's worried about dying of Esau, of a man who didn't believe in God in the first place, of a man who's being sent out, who may be called back if it ever happens. He's just trying to look out for himself at Rebekah's request. Verse 16 says, Then Jacob awoke from his sleep, and he said, Surely the Lord is in this place, and I did not know it. And he was afraid, and he said, How awesome is this place! This is none other than the house of God, and this is the gate of heaven. Oh, he's starting to believe. He's seen some things that are starting to build in him maybe a belief in God. Jacob rose early in the morning, and he took the stone that he had been put under his head, set it up as a pillar, and poured oil on top of it. And he called the name of that place Bethel. But the name of that city had been Luz previously. So he sets up an Ebenezer stone. He places it there. He pours oil on it. He worships God and says, this is the gateway, the heavens. God is here. This is the place called Bethel. Now, he makes a statement here that a lot of pastors look at as being arrogant. But I have a different take on it. I see it a little bit different. I see it as Jacob reaching out for a run-in with God. And that if God showed himself amongst all these other gods that everybody had known about in this time, the idolatry was crazy in the Middle East. Everybody had all kinds of gods. That's where Abraham came from, a place full of gods. And God, the God of the universe, had pulled him out and said, I am your God. I'm the God who's going to promise to you this land. So I see Jacob saying, okay, all right, I need God to prove himself to me so that I could believe in God. I could believe all of these promises that he's telling me because things look so dire. Esau wants to kill me. I'm running away from my homeland. I've got to go off to Laban and get married to some person I don't even know. I don't even know if Laban's going to like me in a nation that I've never been in before. God really needs to show himself, and he says this. This is what he says. Then verse 20, Jacob made a vow, saying, if God will be with me and keep me in the way that I am going, and give me bread and eat clothing and clothing to put on, so that I come back to my father's house in peace, then the Lord shall be my God. And this stone which I have set a pillar shall be God's house. And of all that you give me, I will surely give 1/10 to you. So he makes this promise. He says, look, if you take care of me, if you lead me in this journey, if you bring me back to my household, my father's house in peace, if you provide food and clothing, then you will be my God. And I see this statement as being, you've proven yourself, that you're real, that I could give me something to believe in. Because I could pretend to believe in God until God truly met me one day and proved that he was the only God of my life, and my life has not been the same since. This conversation was made, but in my mind it was, gosh, if God is that powerful, I need him in my back pocket. I have to give my life to him because he did something there's no way I could do it on my own. It was truly a miracle. And that's what happened for me. And I started to believe in God at that point. So Jacob shows up on this journey. He gets married to a woman, or he meets Rachel, and Rachel is beautiful. He tells Laban he wants Rachel. Laban says, work for me 7 years and you can have Rachel. And after 7 years, Laban deceives him and gives him the older daughter Leah instead. And so he's not sure if he was super drunk when he didn't realize that he had relations with Leah and not Rachel or whatever else. So he's really angry. Comes back to Laban and says, you swindled me. He's like, well, we don't give the younger before the older, so work for 7 more years and I'll give you Rachel. And he does. And then he works 6 more years to get more, to build some wealth, so that he could take his wives and his kids. He has 12 sons in this time and a daughter named Dinah. The 12 sons that would be the 12 tribes of Israel, and he's got 12 sons, a daughter, and these and tremendous wealth that God had provided to him. But at some point, Laban gets kind of angry. Laban starts to question what's going on because he sees that God is working in Jacob's life, and he's losing wealth, and Jacob is gaining wealth. And so it says in chapter 31 of Genesis, it says, now Jacob heard the words of Laban's son, saying, Jacob had taken away all that was our father's, and from that was our father's, he was acquired all this wealth. And Jacob saw the countenance of Laban, and indeed it was not favorable towards him. That Jacob was starting to get upset. As before, then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your father and to your family, I will be with you. Now remember, he already said, look, if you keep me safe in this journey, and you bring me back to my father's land in peace, and you provide me food and clothing and wealth, then you will be my God, and I'll give you 1/10 of everything I have. That's what he said. Now God has, over a 20-year period, built his wealth, built his descendants, given him 2 wives, and kept him safe. We'll keep going here. Then the Lord said to Jacob, return to the land of your fathers and to your family, and I will be with you. So Jacob sent and called Rachel and Leah to the field in his flock, and he said to them, I see your father's countenance, that it is not favorable toward me as before. But the God of my father has been with me. And you know that with all my might I have served your father, yet your father has deceived me and changed my wages 10 times. But God did not allow him to hurt me, kept him safe. And you know that with all my might but God did not allow him to hurt me. If he said thus, the speckled shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore speckled in it. And if he said thus, the streaked shall be your wages, then all the flocks bore streaked. So God has taken away the livestock of your father, and given them to me per this deal that they had made in previous chapters. So not only has he kept him safe from Laban, he has built his wealth and provided what he needs from Laban. Exactly what the vow that he had made to God in Bethel. So God has taken away the livestock of your father. Verse 10, and it happened at the time when the flocks conceived that I lifted my eyes and saw in a dream, and behold, the rams which leapt upon the flocks were streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted. And then the angel of God spoke to me in a dream, saying, Jacob. And I said, Here I am. And he said, Lift your eyes now and see all the rams which leap on the flocks are streaked, speckled, and gray-spotted, for I have seen all that Laban is doing to you. I am the God of Bethel, where you anointed the pillar and where you made a vow to me. Now, arise, get out of this land, and return to the land of your family. And then, so Rachel and Leah say, all right, let's go, because Laban has swindled us out of our inheritance anyway, and we don't have any reason to go with you. So they leave. But Jacob fears Laban's anger. He fears that he leaves without telling Laban goodbye, without allowing Laban to kiss his daughters goodbye, without even telling him. So they pack up everything and they leave in the middle of the night, and Laban doesn't know it. They get 3 days out before Laban figures it out. And this makes Laban upset, and Laban pursues Jacob. Now remember, the vow was, hey, let me get back to my house in peace. But peace may not happen now that Laban is after Jacob and his daughters. Verse 22, and Laban was told on the third day that Jacob had fled. And then he took his brethren with him and pursued him for 7 days' journey, and he overtook him in the mountains of Gilead. But God had come to Laban the Syrian in a dream by night and said to him, Be careful that you speak to Jacob neither good nor bad. Basically says, look, Jacob, don't mess with... Look, Laban, don't mess with Jacob. I am God. Now, he's a Syrian. He doesn't believe in God, but God came to him and said, don't mess with Jacob. Now, we'll see in the past there that Laban comes to Jacob and says, I see your God is with you. He has blessed my family. He's blessed my wealth. He's blessed my flocks. Your God has blessed my flocks. Yet he still doesn't believe in him, and Laban, God tells Laban, don't mess with Jacob. So they make this, they yell at each other a little bit. They make this covenant with each other not to hurt each other, and Jacob continues on with his daughters, with his wife and his sons and his daughters. So now comes the next piece of the problem. He has been kept safe from Laban. He has been provided by God from Laban, and Laban is allowing him to leave in peace. That's all good, a part of this vow that he's made. If you were seeking after God in a place, this would be it. God would, you might say, wow, God is real. He's taking care of me. We'll continue in this story as now he's got a problem, because Jacob now has to, if he's going to return to his father's house where he came from, he's going to have to go through the land of which Esau, his brother, is living. And he's worried that Esau is still angry because he hasn't heard anything. Rebekah didn't send for Jacob to come home. God told him to go home. Now that leaves us to a place for a second. If God tells you something, then he's already made the circumstances correct for you to go through it. So if he promised Jacob that he is going to be the descendants of a great nation, the same covenant that's been made with Abraham and Isaac and now Jacob, and will be given to the 12 tribes as they go in the book of Joshua to take over the land, then that's a promise. Death can't come to Jacob or his sons, because then the promise that God had made was null and void. So if Jacob says, God, I need you to protect me, and he says, all right, I'm with you, don't fear, go home, then he's going to make it correctly. He's going to make it work correctly so that you don't have to fear. That's the promise. But That's a perfect Christian belief. That's the perfect understanding of faith, and that's not where I'm at. Right now I'm wondering, gosh, do I really need to, should I just wait for something to just appear? Or should I go out and in my own power go do something else? See, it reminds me of this story, just this really quick situation in First Samuel. At the end of First Samuel, David's been running now forever. He's been running so that he does not get killed by Saul. But this is what it says in chapter 27, verse 1. He's been running. God has been protecting him in mighty ways. There's all kinds of cool stories. He's been promised the kingship. All this stuff, God has said, look, you're not going to die because I promise you to be king. But sometimes our flesh gets in the way. Chapter 27 of 1 Samuel, verse 1 says, and David said in his heart, now I shall perish someday by the hand of Saul. There's nothing better for me to do than I should speedily escape to the land of the Philistines, and Saul will despair of me to seek me any more in any part of Israel, and so I shall escape out of his hand. Listen, David says, okay, my luck's going to run out. God's promise can only go so far, and then I've got to take it into my own hands. And he's been thinking about it in his own heart. He's been dwelling on the thought process, what can I do to keep myself safe? And what does he do? He runs off into the enemy's land. Instead of staying in Israel and listening to God, he has this time where he thinks that he better do something about it, and he comes up with this great plan to run away from Saul because Saul won't come into the land of the Philistines, and he's just got to hide in the Philistines. And 400 people go, all of his men and their families go with him. He leads them into the enemy's camp. But that's a human thing. God gives us all these promises in this Bible, and he says, look, I promise to be with you. I promise to take care of you. Jeremiah 29:11 says, I have a plan, and it's a good plan. It's not one to despair you, but one to give you a future and a hope. And Jeremiah 33:3 says, look, I'll tell you these things, that wonderful things that you do not know. Just trust me. That you will not be overcome by the fire. You won't be drowned under by the flooding waters. I'm with you. You are mine. And I have called you and I've accepted you. So he's made this covenant with Jacob. He's made this covenant with us that we'll live and we will have eternal life through his blood season, all these things. But, oh man, is it human to say, oh yeah, but what if? What do I need to do to help? How do I need to help God out? You don't need to help God out, but we want to. And that makes a guy like me feel like I'm just a lackluster Christian. And like I said, Satan's he's gonna talk in your ear and say, some Christian, you have no faith. You might as well do it yourself. No. But as we find out, God is so wonderful and he's so patient with us. So in chapter 32, Jacob has to go and see Esau. And God has already promised him that go back to your country. I'll be with you. It'll be taken care of. You'll be fine. But Jacob's worried about Esau. He's not believing in God's promise as much as he's worried about Esau's anger that was 20 years ago. He doesn't know how Esau feels now. So he sends these messengers. He says, look, send these messengers out to Esau. Tell him I'm coming through. And I need to know how you're feeling. Are you going to be mad at me? That's basically what it says. And so verse 6 says, and then the messengers returned to Jacob saying, we came to your brother Esau, and he also is coming to meet you, and he's got 400 men with him. So Jacob was greatly afraid and distressed. And he divided the people that were with him and the flocks and the herds and the camels into 2 companies. And he said, if Esau came to the one company and attacks it, then the other company which is left will escape. Now here's Jacob, who's been told by God that you'll be fine and make it back to there, and all your kids will be fine because they're the start of a great nation of which the descendants will be from you, and you will be a blessing to the world. All these things about Israel and how Israel builds. But he takes it into his own hands and thinks of this scheme of splitting everything up, and so half of them can get away if the other half is attacked. He's not listening to God's promises. He's listening to his own wisdom. Sometimes our own wisdom is silly. And I get it. I can understand exactly what it is. Well, I don't know. I'm going to be out of a job in a minute. God tells me he's going to provide. He's got things going on, and I believe him because he has a great plan for me. Oh, but I got to go find a job on my own. I've got to go look. I've got to go pound the pavement and send out resumes and go to monster.com because I got to do it in my own strength. But that's not what God says. God says, I'll provide you what you need. So he's freaked out and he's like, I got this plan and I'll try to protect myself if I can or whatever. And then, interestingly, verse 9 says that Jacob prays. He says, then Jacob said, O God, my father Abraham and God of my father Isaac, the Lord who said to me, return to your country, to your family, and I will deal well with you. He reverberates the promise that God just made to him. He's like, God, I heard you. This is what you said. This is what I'm doing. It says, I'm not worthy of the least of the mercies of all the truth which you have shown your servant. For I crossed over the Jordan with my staff, and now I have become two companies. Deliver me, I pray, from the hand of my brother, from the hand of Esau, for I fear him, lest he come and attack me and the mother with the children. For you said, I will surely treat you well, and make your descendants as the sand of the sea, which cannot be numbered for multitude. And so he goes back to God and says, God, I heard your promise. You told me these things, but I am afraid. I ask for protection and mercy. This is the right thing to do. Seek after the God of Abraham, the God of his father Isaac. He now is starting to understand that God is truly real, and he's calling out to God for protection against his brother Esau. So he lodges in this time, and he's got this all figured out. He kind of comes up with this plan, and he's going to send all these goats and all these and all of this wealth to Esau in an effort to appease him. He's going to send it all out first, so Esau then so that Esau says, "Okay, cool," and then when he finally meets up with Esau, then maybe he'll be softer. He's still working in his own strength and his own wisdom. He's now giving away the wealth that God has given him in an effort to appease man because he fears men and not God. We need to fear God first. God, and by fear meaning we have to have reverence and holy reverence for a God that promises us and doesn't lose promises. This is my wrestling for the last year. Where does my faith go and where does my faith end? I need to wrestle with God. And strangely enough, in verse 22, that's exactly what Jacob does. And he arose the night and took his 2 wives, his 2 female servants, and his 11 sons, and crossed over the ford of Jabbok. He took them and sent them over the brook and sent them over with what he had. And then Jacob was left alone, and a man, capitalized man, wrestled with him until the breaking of day. Now when he said that when he, capitalized, saw that he, capitalized, did not prevail against him, he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the socket of Jacob's hip was out of joint as he wrestled with him. And he said, let me go, for the day breaks. But he said, I will not let you go unless you bless me. So this man, who is a reincarnation, or it's called a Christophany. It is an Old Testament meeting of Jesus before he becomes the human Jesus. It's the angel of God. He is there wrestling with Jacob, and he puts up a great fight. And if you've ever wrestled with God in your prayers and in your feelings, and it's formidable. It's a formidable issue. And at some point, I believe as much as he touched the socket of his hip, he touched the small of my back. And I have been left to a place where I have to give all to God because I don't have the strength anymore. He says, let me go. And Jacob says, I will not let you go unless you bless me. And so he said to him, what is your name? And he said, I am Jacob. And he said, your name shall no longer be called Jacob, but Israel, for you have struggled with God and with men and have prevailed. And then Jacob asked him, tell me your name, I pray. And he said, why is it that you ask me my name? And he blessed him there. And so Jacob called the name of the place Peniel, for I have seen God face to face, and my life is preserved. Just as he crossed over Penuel, the sun rose on him, and he limped on his hip. And therefore, to this day, the children of Israel do not eat the muscle that shrank, which is on the hip socket, because he touched the socket of Jacob's hip, and the muscle that shrank. So Jacob fights with God in this, and God changes his name. Now, this is an interesting deal because when you become understanding of who God is, when you become of who God is, he has another name for you. And that name is something you don't know. When you don't know that name will be given to you when you stand before him. It's written in a rock. It says so in Revelation. That name tells us who we are in God's eyes. Because when we are saved through the Spirit, we are changed. A changed man has a different name. So he goes from Jacob, which means heel catcher or conniver, swindler. He's given the name Israel by God. And what that means is, it means that you struggled with God and you have prevailed. You have been born again. So Jacob is now Israel. And he has seen God face to face. And there is no doubt now that Jacob completely believes in God. And that's where I'm at. I've had that time. I've had that wrestling. I've had that stuff. So sometimes when I get to this point when I just don't believe, then I start to wonder what kind of a guy I am. And then I remember that God knows that we are but dust. So Jacob meets Esau. It says, 33 verse 1 says, now Jacob lifted his eyes and looked, and there was Esau coming with their 400 men. And so he divided the children among Leah and Rachel and the two maidservants. And he put the maidservants and their children in front, Leah and her children behind, and Rachel and Joseph last. And then he crossed over before them and bowed himself to the ground 7 times until he came near to his brother. Verse 4, but Esau ran to meet him and embraced him and fell on his neck and kissed him, and they wept. God knew that Esau wasn't angry at Jacob. He had already sent him into a situation that wasn't dangerous because he said, I'll be with you. Just go home. I have taken care of all of this. And after wrestling with God, he's blessed by the fact that he meets Esau, and Esau is not angry with him. It's so good. It's so good. And then as we move to 35, Jacob is getting better. Jacob is starting to understand more about who he is in God, and his beautiful faith continues to build. And so in chapter 35, verse 1, it says, then God said to Jacob, arise. And that word arise is kum, Q-U-M. It is not a, hey, whenever you're ready, just get up and go. No, it is a hostile demand to go. So it says, arise, go up to Bethel. Remember that place where he saw the ladder of the angels, where he started all of this? Go back to Bethel and dwell there, and make an altar there to God who appeared to you when you fled from the face of Esau, your brother. So he goes out and he cleanses his family and he heads that way. And in verse 9 it says, then God appeared to Jacob again, and when he came from Padan Aram, and he blessed him. And God said to him, your name is Jacob. Your name shall not be called Jacob anymore, but Israel shall be your name. So he called his name Israel. Also God said to him, I am God Almighty. Be fruitful and multiply. A nation and a company of nations shall proceed from you, and kings shall come from your body. The land which I gave Abraham and Isaac I give to you and to your descendants after you, and I give this land. And then God went up to him in the place where he talked with him. So Jacob set up a pillar in the place where he talked with him, and a pillar of stone, and he poured a drink offering on it, and he poured oil on it. And Jacob called the name of the place where God spoke with him Bethel. Jacob lives all the way to the end of the book of Genesis. And then he dies, and he dies a man of great faith. Now, Jacob had his problems. He had his issues. He was a swindler. He always tried to make himself better. He used his own power and his own thought process. He used his own cunning and cleverness to get to win the birthright, which God told him he was going to give him the birthright, but he swindled it anyway. That's for another time. He started to understand that God was in his life, that God was looking out for him, that God had made promises to him, that he had heard those promises from Abraham and from his father Isaac. But he needed his own time to meet God himself, to understand truly that it was real, that it was understood. And then on top of that, he still had his moments when his faith wasn't as powerful as he thought, and he thought he needed to do something in his own power to protect himself, only to find out that God's promises were true, that God had never led him into a dangerous situation, but had only led him into wonderful blessings. Now, Jacob continually messes around, but I tell you what, his faith grows tremendously, so much so that he is named in the Hall of Faith in Hebrews chapter 11. He is known as one of the three patriarchs of the Christian Judaism and Christianity. That the God of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob is the father of Jesus Christ. We need to understand those things. You're talking about a man who had all kinds of issues, who had all kinds of doubts, whose faith failed him, and he tried to do things in his own power, much like David. They're all in the lineage of David. But at the very end, God found him worthy to be a patriarch. He found him worthy to be named in the Hall of Faith as a man who was tremendously faithful to believe that his sons were going to carry on the promises that God had made. And that's where I have to be. I have to say, okay, God knows that I am but dust, and I have my issues, and I am a sinner, and I have my anxieties and fears, and sometimes I wonder what I have to do on my own because just in case. But I'm trying really hard to live a life where my faith is so uncomfortable that by the time I stand before the Lord and I say, I gave it all to you and you provided and changed my name, I can't wait to know what my name is in heaven. I want to live a life that believes and trusts in God so much that it's uncomfortable to my mentality because my brain is so small. Remember what it says in Isaiah, where it says that his ways are higher than our ways and his thoughts higher than our thoughts. He knows what he's doing and he has these plans. And I'm starting to see all these little puzzle pieces fitting together in my life that may be in the most amazing story that I've ever lived. I don't even care about what it is that I want anymore because he's proven in my life that what he wants for me is far better than anything I could come up with myself. I hope this blesses you if you're struggling in a time of hardship and you don't know where to turn because your faith is somehow lacking sometimes. Trust in God and his promises because they're immutable and unchanging. But know that sometimes we're going to stumble. We're going to fall. He knows that we're simply but dust and that he casts our sins as far as the east is from the west. And he takes pity on us. He loves us as a father loves his children. Know that God is faithful. Even when we're faithless, he remains faithful. Take care of everybody, and God bless.